Whenever we teach a course, we want to think about how we're helping students to engage the course content. That's going to be especially important during this period of remote instruction because we don't have the same kinds of face-to-face cues that we do when we teach students in a class. So this video is going to help you think about planning very carefully how you can help students engage content remotely. As a reminder, it's a great idea to start with the planning grid that we've introduced in some earlier videos. You can see that the grid asks you to think about goals and objectives for the course, the kind of content you're using, 2 or 3 things students need to know to engage with the content, assessments, and takeaways. In this video, we're really focusing on the third column, 2 or 3 things students must know how to do to engage with the content, especially things like readings, engagement with text, textbooks, etc. The takeaway for this video is that to engage students in your courses, you really need to create a kind of through line for them. You have to consistently explain and connect everything together by helping students recognize what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're expected to do it. That's going to be, again, especially important during this period of remote instruction because we won't have the kind of verbal cues or the opportunity for students to make connections with us and ask questions as we do face-to-face. So in any course, there are 3 typical types of learning or activities that we undergo or we ask students to think about. And I'm going to run through these and then define each of them more carefully as we go through the video. So sometimes these learning activities involve knowing how, sometimes knowing that or knowing what, and sometimes knowing or showing why. So now I'm going to define each of these in more detail. Knowing how is something that's really important, but we might not always introduce as explicitly as other things. It means knowing how to engage the things that we're asking students to engage. So for example, in reading, and by reading I mean textbooks, primary sources, equations, films, photographs, anything that you're asking students to engage with, explaining why people are reading it and how they should do it. How does this text do what it does? So you can see in the column that says what you need to show or explain, I've said you need to really show students how does the text work? How is it put together? So is there a title that's important? Is there an abstract they should pay attention to? Are there subject headings that make a big difference? You want to really tell students this so they know how they know where to put their attention. Because not all pieces of a text are equally important. You want to show people this is where you need to pay attention now. Next, you want to talk about, or we ask students to learn about, knowing that and knowing what in any course. So knowing that is a kind of knowledge about things, knowledge that's subject to verification, knowledge that is or can be replicated, knowledge that is consistent. So anytime we give students something to look at, read any kind of text, we want them to identify what does this say? When did things happen? What does the text say about a thing? What's the process of this thing? How does this thing occur? This kind of knowledge, this knowing that or knowing what knowledge, is a really important baseline for the kind of analysis that we often ask students to do and want them to do in any course. But we want them to do analysis based on what is in the content that we want them to engage. Knowing or showing why is really, again, that kind of analysis or critical thinking that we ask students to engage with. This is performance that is underpinned by understanding and application in the context of your course or discipline. And that's really important. Critical thinking or good analysis looks different in a science discipline than it does in a humanities discipline, in one humanities discipline from another. So you really want to help students understand how they can identify what knowing or showing why means in your context. You can see the typical kinds of questions you might ask. What is the relevance of one thing for another thing? How does one concept help us understand a different kind of phenomenon? What do you make of a particular artifact in light of an idea from another artifact? So this is a kind of analysis that we want students to do, but that they won't be able to do very successfully unless they know how to engage the texts you're asking them to look at and what they should take away from those texts to inform their analysis. So you really want to emphasize and work with students on knowing how to engage the texts, what they should take away in their knowing that and knowing what knowledge, and then how to apply it. So to illustrate this, I have excerpted a chapter from a book called How People Learn, and the chapter is called How Novices Differ from Experts. And I've made 3 separate videos, also linked in the GauchoSpace site, and you'll see the URLs on the slides, that illustrate how you could build in and make little videos for your students to learn about how they can use a text in the knowing how, knowing that, and knowing why framework. So first, the first little video, which is 2 minutes long, focuses on knowing how, and that's noticing or describing for your students. How does the text do what it does? So in the video that I've made that's called Knowing How, you will see that I am going through this chapter called How Experts Differ from Novices, treating you in some ways as students, quote unquote, in my class. And I'm just saying, well, if I were going to walk through this, I'd say, you know, look, here's a summary of what the chapter's about. That's really important. And here's a numerical list of important points in the chapter. Well, that's going to focus my attention. And I've made comments in the PDF on the side that you can open up. The second video I've made focuses on knowing that and knowing what. And here it's showing how I would do a reading of this chapter, looking at the knowledge and facts that students would need to take away from this chapter. So pointing out the really important things and how you can find them, or how students can find them, is not quote unquote spoon feeding students knowledge. It's really helping them recognize how they can look at the important points in a chapter. And you can see in the video, I've only done a few pages of the chapter, not the whole thing, but in doing a few pages, I'm modeling how students would read the rest of the chapter. Finally, I've made a video focusing on knowing why, applying the ideas, and showing how, if I were going to engage in a knowing why reading, how I would do that. And again, I've used the PDF to make comments in the chapter. So the important thing when we think about engaging students in course content is to prioritize. Students absolutely need to know what content they should engage, how they should engage it and why, when to engage content at different times, and how they will be assessed. What are they going to be expected to know from what they're doing? So you want to tell students too, how much time should they spend with a text? What should they pay the most attention to? And again, this is helping with that issue of prioritizing. How can they tell what to pay attention to in a text? And that's the question of how. And then what they'll do with the text that you're asking them to read. Again, back to the assessment. We've created a planning grid to help you with prioritizing what you want students to take away from texts. And that again is linked in the GauchoSpace site and to these slides. So just as a final reminder, you've got this, you can do it. And really thinking about knowing how, knowing what, knowing why, and helping students recognize what they should do in each of those realms will be really helpful as well.